Everybody, can you kindly take your seats because we will be beginning the next session. In this next session, we have Dr. Meenakshi Jain, historian and author, in conversation with Alo about her book, The Hindus of Hindustan, a civilizational journey.
Welcome to this penultimate session of today's edition of the Pondy Lit Fest Good Book Talks. Today we have, the only way I qualify her personally is that she's my guru when it comes to history. But Dr. Meenakshi Jain is, I think, quite undisputably the queen of absolutely impeccable research. She has written a lot of history books that we have all read, where she has worked very hard to show a lot of continuity in lots of ways. She has involved the invaders, she has talked about iconoclasm, and she has made us re-look at invasions in very different ways. But this book is completely different. These are 19 chapters. They are definitely written in a chronological order, but she has compiled 19 ideas that define the Hindus of Hindustan. I don't even know how you started to even conceive of the ideas that have in your mind, been distilled to define us, and where does your research begin? So this is a very, very big scope, and I'm very curious to know how did it all come about.
Thank you, Alo. It's always a delight to have an interaction with you because you read everything with such care. The amount of powerful presentations that I've heard since morning has been an eye-opener because it reinforces the point that what a long distance Hindu civilization has covered in these millennia. And Alo has talked about my present book. It's a work that I studied and worked upon for almost a decade. And there was no systematic plan. I did a lot of reading and made notes on the relevant points because very curious to understand what this civilization is all about. And when it has witnessed so much turbulence and upheaval in its history, how come in a fundamental manner it has not deviated from its founding principles? And so I began to trace, it's a thematic work, it's not chronological, and I began to trace this civilizational journey of a most remarkable people who I am so honored and thrilled to call my ancestors and whom we all should be proud of. The point is that we don't know enough about them. So this Hindu civilizational journey, I use the term Hindu because by and large, my study stops around the 8th century. I just have a few chapters which discuss the changes that happen in the 8th century. So before the 8th century, the period that I largely cover is a period which predominantly is peopled by people whom we call Hindus. Now, this civilizational journey, as I said, it begins very remarkably from a sukta in the Rig Veda. Now that sukta talks about the area which our founding fathers were aware of. Obviously, when the Indian civilizational journey started, the whole of the subcontinent was not known to our ancestors. So the Nadi Sukta of the Rig Veda, it tells us the area that they were familiar with. They only knew of northwestern India and Punjab. And it is a remarkable case of how the spread of these people and the civilizational idea to eastern India and to the south and to the west can be traced on the basis of certain passages from our sacred scriptures. For example, the movement to eastern India we can trace in the Shatpatha Brahmana. We have the entry of this culture into the south. We have these myths of Agastya and so many others. Now the key principles of this civilization are that wherever the people went, it was not barren land. People were already living there. They may be hunters, they may be fish gatherers, whatever they were. But from the absolute word inception, the civilization, it embraced and accepted everyone. So there is no evidence of any discrimination between the so-called Vedic founders of our civilization and the people they encountered in the subcontinent. Now this journey across the subcontinent was completed by 500 BC. By 500 BC, our ancestors had a very good idea of the physical geography of this entire land. And we have evidence to prove that they knew of the entire physical landscape of the subcontinent when Alexander invades India 2 centuries later, and he thinks that he has reached Egypt and he will go to the Nile and from there cross back and go to the Mediterranean. But when he comes to Punjab, he meets people and he realizes that he's actually lost. So he asks the people of this land to describe this physical landmass. And that description what the people gave him, this much distance in miles from north to east, east to south, that was given by Alexander to the historians who accompanied him, and that is recorded in their accounts which have survived till today. 2000 years later, Alexander Cunningham, who was the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, he studied those reports which Alexander's historians who had accompanied him had written. And he matched it with the actual distance from one place to another. And he said it is absolutely remarkable that more than 2000 years ago, the Indians of this land had such a remarkable knowledge of this land. And it's absolutely accurate. That is the first point that strikes me about this beginning of our civilizational journey. And again, on the basis of sacred texts, the most powerful sentiment that we come across is veneration and adoration of this land. The Nadi Sukta expresses gratitude toward the rivers to which this land owed so much. Then we have Vishwamitra Nadi Sukta, again homage to 2 rivers that the sage wants their help to cross. And the most important is what is called the Prithvi Sukta, which is part of the Atharvaveda. The Prithvi Sukta has been described as the first national song of the world. And it's 63 verses long. So imagine a national song written in BC, which is 63 verses long, and it describes the land, and it describes the features of this land, what is happening over here, what are the values of this land. Sabhas, Samitis, Yagyas are performed over here, Ashwins perform their feats, and it talks about the principles of cosmic truth, veneration, penance, etc. So, it is absolutely amazing that before 500 BC, the Indians had a complete knowledge of the geographical locale of their land, and early expressions of total veneration and adoration of this land. And after we cross the Atharva Ved, then we have a lot of Bharat Prashastis that are written. These Bharat Prashastis are hymns in praise of the land. And there are so many of them in the Mahabharata, etc. And Vishnu Puran, it says that, you have to have accumulated merit of hundreds of rebirths to be able to be blessed to be born in this land. And the Bhagavad Puran says that, it is, they are expressing their gratitude to God that, it's a blessing to be born here. Every man cannot be born in this land. And Al-Biruni, who accompanied Mahmud Ghaznavi to India in the 11th century, he writes in the Al-Hind, and these I'm quoting from Al-Hind, he says, the Hindus think there is no country like theirs, no religion like theirs, and he goes on and on. So, this absolute veneration of the land was something that was noticeable and hit even foreigners who were coming outside to India and observing this absolute worship and veneration of the land. So these are some very, very early features of our civilization that I found very, very fascinating and interesting. And the thing is that this sentiment persists. There have been talks today about the Islamic Advent and the British Advent. But my study shows that this attitude of veneration, it remained unchanged, but we have to study when and why it changed. So this is the first part of you.
The next concept that I think is most important, and we listen to it all the time, is the concept of Dharma and the Dharma Shastras. So one of the things that I'll tell you what I do in class is when you read the Artha Shastra, when you tell that it's a book of directives, how do you know that actually these principles were put in action? And then you read Radha Kumud Mukherjee, something that you recommended to me. You find a Megasthenes who was there in the times of the Chandragupta Maurya. And that's how you get a foreign account, and then that's how you corroborate and the Ashokan edicts. But your analysis of the Dharma Shastras and the way they were written tells a different story. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah. So what I said was that the underlying theme of this civilization was to assimilate everyone, accommodate everyone, exclude no one, and to find space for everyone. So the Dharma, and the point is that there was so much to be accommodated. So an attempt was made to provide theoretical uniformity, so that there is a theoretical unity, and the absolute divergence of opinions doesn't overwhelm the reader. Now this Dharma Shastra that you talked about, we all know of we all have heard of what is Dharma, but we are unsure of what exactly it means. What is Dharma? Is it law? Is it religion? Etc. So in this period, a lot of Dharma Shastras were written, and the Dharma Shastras claimed that we are the final word on law, and we are deriving our authority from the Vedas because we are sanctifying and recommending what is the law to be followed according to the Vedas. So they are giving themselves the air of legitimacy that whatever we are recommending is sanctioned by the Vedas. This is the claim of the Dharma Shastras in theory. But when we scratch the surface, we find a lot of counter texts which say that Dharma, every community, every caste has the right to follow its own Dharma. And Artha Shastra you mentioned, Artha Shastra says that when the king conquers another territory, he should ensure that he allows the people of those territories to follow their own customs. He should not impose his customs. So, this reinforces the point that Dharma Shastras was actually a record of the customs and practices of every group, every community, however small in India. And there is a Dharma Shastra of Gautama. It says that
the dharma of the Shudras is dharma for them. And Narad says that when a king conquers a territory, he should make sure that the laws of that territory are enforced and he does not impose his own laws on them. So the Dharma Shastra literature actually confirms what we think should have been the natural practice of India, keeping in mind our tradition that we see in the Vedas. And
so she has chronicled inscription after inscription and proof after proof where the law actually reflects the practice. And it's not that the practice has to be in accordance with law. So it is really very much an assimilation.
Yes, it's assimilation, and no attempt is ever made to impose laws from above by the state or by anybody. Every law, every community, however small, whatever its status in society, whatever this hierarchy, it is allowed complete freedom to follow its own laws. It is mandatory for the king to make sure that no imposition is done, and every group follows. There are references to Jati Dharm, Kul Dharm, Desh Dharm, Nagar Dharm. The community of merchants, they have their own dharma because they have their rules of trade, etc. So every community dharma is mentioned even in the Arthashastra.
And interestingly, the tabulation of these Dharma Shastras was done only when Buddhism under Ashoka started to define Dharma, and that is when we realized the necessity
Yes.
to sort of define and put into stone ours.
Yeah.
I mean, at least scribe.
Yes. Actually, because there was not felt much need
Yes.
to write texts on Dharma, because it was understood that everybody will be allowed to follow their own religion customs. But with the rise of Buddhism, when the concept of Dharma became so important and center stage, that is when the rest of the society felt that we should also have commentaries on Dharma.
I want to go back a little bit to the consciousness of the geographical extent of the land, because we live in South India, and it's very important for people who live here as well as people in the north to have this consciousness as to how and when and how early the entirety, like you mentioned 500 bit, but can you just show us the progression of how it happened?
Actually, Panini, who lived in the 6th century, he knows of India only up till Pathan. Then Patanjali, he knows of kingdoms further down, and he talks about kingdoms of Kerala. And in the Ashokan inscriptions, they talk about the whole of, but they say that Chola kingdom, Kerala kingdom were not part of Ashoka's empire. So there is evidence from very early on. And Megasthenes also makes some very interesting points. He talks about Kerala, and he says that the kingdom of Kerala, actually it is unique because it is a queendom. It has never been ruled by a man. The woman has always been the ruler. And he actually mentions the migration of certain communities from North India to the Pandya kingdom, for example. And when we look at the subsequent inscriptions, many kingdoms which were ruling in the south, they say that we came from the north. For example, the Chalukya kingdom, they say that 59 of our kings ruled in Ayodhya, and after that we migrated. So the point that I am making is that the people in the entire length and breadth of this country, they always try to associate themselves and link themselves with what we call the All India tradition. They never said that we are separate, we have nothing to do with this tradition. All the kings said we are descendants of certain particular hero from the Mahabharata or from the Ramayana. The inscriptions of so many kings, they say that I am ruling like Ram used to rule, And so this constant invocation of all India symbols, all India cultural heroes, this is there right from the beginning. There is this Ikshvaku dynasty that was ruling in Andhra, and they say that we are belonging to the same clan as Lord Ram. So I'm not getting into whether it's true or not, but no king says that I'm outside this cultural stream. They all want to link themselves with this cultural stream which is derived from incidents of the Mahabharata, Ramayana, our cultural heroes, and that is something that is really remarkable.
The next question that, in fact, it was a surprise for me because when you think of temples, you often think of by patronage by the kings, by the rulers.
Yes.
But your book gives an astoundingly different picture of who patronized and the kinds of contributors that we had for temples.
Yeah, but before I come to the kings, what is absolutely remarkable is the involvement of women as patrons. For example, in Mathura, there was this tradition of what is called ayag pattas, where tablets were made, which were put flat tablets like a mobile, and there would be a swastik or something on one side, and it would be placed and would be used for worship. And excavations at Mathura found almost 99% of the ayag pattas had been donated by women. And that is absolutely, when we talk about feminism and all that, we have to keep this in mind that the donors in North India were largely women. Second point is that the temples, for example, at Sanchi, the original stupa at Sanchi was of bamboo and mud, which was built by Ashok. And about 100 years later, when new construction methods came and they thought they'll make a bigger stupa with stone, etc. So a big stupa was made, the remnants of which we see now. Now this stupa was completed by, it was started about 200 BC and completed by 100 AD. Now what is fascinating about this stupa, that 610 inscriptions relating to that stupa have been found and have been documented and published. So of these 610 inscriptions which are documented and published, there are only 3 inscriptions which mention royalty, and that also in a very, very vague manner. The rest of the inscriptions record the donations of ordinary people. So the point that we have to keep in mind that when we talk about this civilization, how has it survived so long? It is because every person contributed to this, related to this. I mean, out of 610 inscriptions, 607 are by people who are they? Who are these ordinary people? There are some workers who actually help in the construction of the stupa. For example, there were ivory workers from Vidisha who were invited to carve a gateway, a part of a gateway. So the inscription on Sanchi stupa is still standing that we are the ivory workers who had come from Vidisha and have carved this gateway, and we are gifting this gateway that we have carved to this stupa. So metal workers, laborers, of course monks, nuns, household workers. I mean, the list is absolutely amazing, and they're coming from all parts of India. And Buddhist caves at Nasik, Karle, Junar in the western Ghats, they also are contributors, are ordinary people. And it is very interesting that there is one inscription. He says, I'm an Eka driver. Eka driver means like a rickshaw person. So he says, I carry people to and fro, and I have contributed this. It is, and the first murti that has been found of Saraswati from Mathura is by a metal worker. He was a metal worker, and he is saying that I am gifting this murti to of Saraswati. None of the important early Buddhist statues, Buddha statues at Mathura were gifted by royalty. They were all the absolutely magnificent, huge Buddha figures. The contributions were of ordinary nuns, monks, ordinary laymen, and people who have given their contribution have been proud to contribute to the cause and have recorded their things. And when we talk about these records, we must keep in mind that India, especially North India, was invaded time and time again. So there is no inscription that has survived intact. Most inscriptions have been lost. So many of them have been damaged. But whatever has survived explains why this civilization has survived, because it was the contribution of ordinary people, it was protected by ordinary people, and they ensured that the civilization survives in some manner even when it was threatened, you know.
So continuity and the epics.
Yeah.
You know, the epics have continuity and have contributed to the geography of the land, to the sacredness of the land, to the versions of the epics that exist everywhere. So can you just tell us that what are the themes in your book that the epics actually cover? Just the epics here.
But just before that, I want to say that the importance of Tirth
Yes.
as an all India institution. You know, no religious leader promoted parochialism. Shankara did not say that I am from Kerala, so you only do your Tirths in Kerala. So the vision of everybody was from Himalayas to Kanyakumari. And in fact, I wanted to say this earlier. You know, Kautilya, he was the first person to articulate the idea of political unity. In the Arthashastra, he says that from the Himalayas to the seas, there should be one ruler. It did not mean that there was political unity, but that ideal that it should, that is the field of the Chakravarti Raja. So this concept of Chakravarti Raja, even if a king was ruling in 10 villages, he said, I am Chakravarti. Because this, you know, this awareness of an all India concept, it had percolated to every level. There was no concept, actually there was no concept which did not percolate to the lowest level of society. You talked about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. You know, the Ramayana, Camille Bulke, he calculated how many versions of the Ramayana there were. And he found that he was aware of 300 versions of the Ramayana. There was no region of India which did not have its own version of the Ramayana. So it had become an all India text. As far as the Mahabharata is concerned, the spread of the Mahabharata is an absolutely fascinating story. And this is a work that has been done by a scholar, and I think his work should be known. You know, when Suktankar was preparing the critical edition of the Mahabharata, he and his team invited versions of the Mahabharata from various parts of the country. So they got God knows how many hundred versions, and the rule is that whichever version is the shortest is closest to the original version. So in the North India, they got the Sharda version. In the South, from the Tamil region, they got a very elaborate version of the Mahabharata, which was much longer than the original version. So obviously it had so many editions, it could not be. But they were surprised that the shortest version of the Mahabharata from South India came from Kerala. Now Kerala was furthest away from North India. In that corner of Kerala, how did the shortest version of the Mahabharata reach there? And then this scholar did a backtracking, and he found that in 500 BC, 500 Brahmins migrated from Mathura to the Tamil region. And 500 they migrated because they calculated that we can marry among ourselves, we don't have to marry, you know, all that Gotra and all that. And they took with them the version of the Mahabharata that was available in the Mathura region around 500 BC. And that version from Mathura remained in the Tamil region till the 7th century AD. In the 7th century AD, there was this episode which is called the Kalbhra interregnum. So they migrated from Tamil region and they went to Kerala. And these are people that we know as the Nambudri Brahmins. So the Nambudri Brahmins, they kept that version of the Mahabharata which they had taken from Mathura 500 BC, and it was a frozen text that remained in Kerala. So, and from there Suktankar and his team got it, and they based the South Indian version on this text. So I'm saying that every story that you try to understand of the ancient period, it's a remarkable story of how this whole vast land with primitive means of communication was kept intact, united by the same values, united by veneration of the land, and nobody was kept out of it. In fact, we talk so much about the caste system. Gautam says that a rishi, an Arya, and a Malech are to be respected if they have special knowledge of particular thing, because knowledge is what we cherish. And this Al-Biruni, he writes that the Greeks are Malechas, but they have learning, and that is why they are venerated in India. So Indian veneration for learning, and there is this concept which I think you alluded to, but I will elaborate, that this concept, I've told you about Dharma, but there was another important concept, the concept of Aryavart. Now what was this concept of Aryavart? The concept of Aryavart was a place where correct speech and correct conduct prevailed. That means Shishtachar, those people spoke correct language and they had proper conduct. And the people who were the custodians of learning, that is the Brahmins, they only had enough grain to store in a small jar, and they cultivated learning for its own sake and not for any value. So this was the concept of Aryavart. It was first confined to a small region. As the Vedic founders became aware of larger parts of India, Aryavart became Brahmrishi De, Madhya Desh, and up till the Narmada it became all pure land. Then subsequently Medhatithi, he writes that land itself is not impure. Land itself cannot be impure. So how do we cultivate the rest of the land? If you follow the practices of society, the social order in the north, then the south or whichever part of India can also be Aryavart, because land itself is not impure. So this broadness of mind, this not being rigid about anything, about accepting the practices of everyone they encounter, of venerating knowledge from whoever it may be. And if I can move on.
Please do.
We have this thing that, we became a closed society with the coming of Arabs and Turks in the 8th century. Actually, it may surprise you that in the ancient period, that is before the 8th century, large parts of northwestern India were ruled for a long time by a series of foreign rulers. Greeks, Shakas, Kushans, Huns, they all ruled over large parts of northwestern India. And there are some things that we should know about this. None of these rulers, they were rulers, none of them tried to impose any value system on the people that they conquered. In fact, we have inscriptions and other evidence, coins. So they all immerse themselves in the sacred tradition of this land. Some become followers of Shiva, some become followers of Vishnu, etc., etc. And what is the evidence? I'm not just giving loose talk. This is not loose talk. We have for the Kushans, we have their coins that have survived. In the case of the Kushans, there is a beautiful sculpture in Mathura Museum where two young men are dressed in Kushan attire and are bowing before a shivling. There is Menander, he was a Bactrian Greek. His conversion to Buddhism is immortalized in a play, Milind Panu. Milind Panu means that the dialogues of King Milind. And what were these dialogues? He went around large parts of North India interacting with religious leaders. And then he met Nagsen, who was a Buddhist monk, and he has a long dialogue with him, and he accepts that, this person has more knowledge, and he embraces Buddhism. We have all heard of Huns. They were barbarians. They destroyed and burnt wherever they went. In Gwalior Fort, Alexander Cunningham found an inscription which says that Meherkula, the Hun, bowed before Pashupati Shiva. So, there is no evidence of any of these people disturbing the religious harmony of this land. The Shakas, we have the queen, Shaka queen, the Mathura pillar statue has been found. It's in British Museum now. At the back of the statue is an inscription which records her donation to the Sangh. Rudra Daman Shaka in Western India, his inscription is the first inscription in Sanskrit. He's a foreigner, and he writes in that inscription that I compose kavyas in Sanskrit. I honor Brahmins. I do so much charity. So all this evidence is something that we have to contrast with what happens to us later. And Patanjali, when he talks about these people, he says that these people are Shudras, but they don't have to be expelled from the dish. Expelled from the dish means that if they use utensils, you don't have to throw away the utensils. Those utensils can be washed and cleaned. And there is a very interesting dialogue of a king when he's imagining a dialogue with Indra, and he says that these Malechas, how are we to integrate them? What are the societal norms? Indra says they don't have to do any prayashchit, there is no ceremony. If they start accepting and living like their neighbors, then they are pure for us. So this kind of, there was no barrier between, I don't know when these concepts of barriers became part of our syllabus and curriculum and thinking, because in the ancient period there doesn't seem to be. Because the lawmakers, Manu, he says there are only 4 castes. There is no 5th caste. And the 4 castes, the 5th caste are those who are people who are the offspring of mixed varnas. So he never says that they are, outcasts in that sense. He says a Brahmin has a relationship with a Vaishya, then the son is a, 5th varna. But otherwise the varnas are 4 and the rest are derived from them. So look at the capacious attitude of, and Manu whom we revile and we think that he is a very hardbound person who laid down strict rules. He is saying there is no 5th caste, all are descendants of mixed marriages of these 4 castes. And he says that it is very easy for a person who is of a low caste to enhance his status by just following the practices. What are the practices? Observe your sacred duties and show respect to Brahmins. So this kind of social order is so different from what we are taught in our schools and colleges, that was a rigid caste bound society, close to everyone. And but when we look at the text, it is a totally different picture that we get, and so much of this flexible attitude, it was a real surprise to me also when I began this study. And I just want to say that why did this attitude change? I have made the point that before the coming of the Arabs and Turks, though large parts of northwestern India and even Gujarat and Maharashtra were ruled by foreign dynasties whose ancestry we can trace, and I have traced in my book, there is no attempt of them imposing their own values or belief systems on the native population. In fact, they embraced what they found in that locality. So we don't have any memory of Kushans being raiders or Shakas being raiders or etc. Now this situation changes in the 8th century, and why it changes? is because of the total assault on our belief systems with the arrival of the Arabs and Turks. And this is something that Al-Baruni, who came with Mahmud Ghaznavi, who wrote a fantastic study of Hindu society called the Al-Hind. He stayed in India for a long time and studied India in depth, and he's written a most fantastic book on India at his time. And he says that the Hindus, they used to respect learning. They didn't look at whether you were a foreigner or not, they respected your learning. And he says, but why did this attitude change? When and why did this attitude change? And he says, then the Arabs came. And he gives a vivid description of Muhammad bin Qasim's attack on Multan. And he says that, Muhammad bin Qasim was told that the wealth of Multan is coming from the Sun Temple, which gets, offerings from all over India. And he says that Muhammad bin Qasim was told that this is a very sacred place for the community, and he hung a cow's flesh around the neck of that deity, Sun Temple. And he says that, this is something that continued after that. And he says by the time he comes to Mahmud Ghaznavi, who was his patron, he says, the systematic destruction of all their holy sites, Somnath, Mathura, he names them all. And he writes a very, very moving account. He says that the Hindus became like atoms of dust scattered in all directions. So they, took retreat and they hid in far off places like Kashmir, where our arms cannot reach. And he says from that day, they have the most hostile attitude towards us, and the mothers frighten their crying children at night by saying, the Turks are coming. So that kind of, and I just take to me.
Please go, it's your show.
No, and what I want to say when I contrast this with two examples that I want to give. There was a group of sun worshippers in Iran. They were called Magas. They used to worship sun. And so it is said that Krishna's son suffered from leprosy. So he invited 20 families of Maga Brahmins to come and settle in Multan and to practice sun worship, and his son also got cured. Those Magas who came from Iran, because they were priests in Iran, Indian society gave them the designation of Brahmins, and they were called Maga Brahmins. And the Maga Brahmins soon spread over large parts of India. They were venerated by every king, they were given donations, whatever. But I am saying they completely amalgamated, and Varam Mihira was also a Maga Brahmin. The other group that we have, and this Maga Brahmin documentation is fully there, when they came, how they came, where they went, those inscriptions and all I have quoted. And then there is another group, the Kamboj. They are supposed to have participated in the Mahabharata war, and they were specialists in making kambals, blankets. And they say that in Yudhishthir's coronation ceremony, they gifted kambals. This is all recorded in the Mahabharata. And those people, they are also the kind of veneration that they are given. The point that has to be noted is that there was Hindu society did not shut its doors to anyone. It accorded respect, admiration to anyone who came and gave a status according to their profession and their calling in their home, and that is what they did over here. We are talking about the decolonization of the Hindu mind. It is very, very sad that in the last 50 or 100 years, we are learning the history that the British taught us. The British taught us that there was no India before we came. But Kautilya, well before the British came, was saying that from North India to South India, there should be one ruler. And I mean, the hatred that we have towards ourselves, towards our priestly community, to our educated, the learners of our community. we have contempt for everybody, and that shows how much decolonization has to be done by all of us, because we are wittingly or unwittingly going on parroting what the British have taught us. We have become aware to some extent, but there is a very, very long distance that we have to travel.
So, why am I even here? Please go ahead.
No.
The thing is that she has two sections to her book. So, the first part is before the Islamic invaders, and she has a part B when you have the, as she said, Muhammad bin Qasim's advent. Now, what is to be noted, I just come to the end, this is the last point, and then we'll throw, is that, you know, we are told a narrative, you know, that there was coexistence, that somehow we are Hindus, there are Muslims, and we lived a coexistence, and now we are having this strife, we are putting in fissures into society. But then it's very, very clear.
Yeah, I'll answer this because time is running out.
Yeah, you have to answer 2 points. One is that the local narrative is that people who converted could not give up their old practice. But you have to talk about the patronage of foreign nobility and what that
No, but
was.
it depends on how much time is there?
You have around 12 minutes.
Okay, so I'll answer the Rajput question first, because
yes,
if in
I think
case
that is the
Gloria-
new part. Yeah.
You see, the point is that we have been told that there was Hindu-Muslim unity, and till the British came, the Hindu-Muslim unity was fine. And the best example that has been given to us is the Mughal marriage alliances with Rajputs. Now, this is a subject that really needs to be investigated for some very simple reasons. The Mughals, in their court histories, never said that we have married Rajput women. Jahangir never said that I am the son of I'm a half Rajput by birth. They all said that we are pure Timurids. So when we talk, I mean, you know, I don't know how we get these slogans and we go on burdening ourselves with such rubbish. So no Persian court history mentions Mughal Badshah's marriages with Rajput, and the Rajputs they were marrying were also Rajput royal families, isn't it? So it was not that they were marrying beneath their status. So, but no Persian history mentions Mughal relations or marriages with Rajputs. That is only half the story. The Rajputs were very petrified at what they were doing, and they felt that, you know, we need to explain to our future generations what we have done. So the Rajput rulers in their courts, they get rival histories written. Can you imagine? Akbar is getting the Akbarnama written in his court, and his friend and relative, brother-in-law, Man Singh, is getting another history written at the court of Amber that is called Man Charit. That is the history of the Man Singh's family. And in that, the writer, the historian, writes that, you know, Man Singh's grandfather, he comes from such a noble family of warriors, etc., and the battles he won, etc., etc. But Man Singh's historian does not write that Man Singh's grandfather gave his daughter in marriage to Akbar. I mean, this is absolutely remarkable that we are supposed to be, you know, learning about Muslim or Mughal Rajput relations as the bedrock of, you know, that period, that the Mughals were so accommodating and the Rajputs were equal partners. But what kind of a patronage is this, that the Persian histories don't mention the Rajput marriages, and the Rajput princes, Rajput history don't mention that we gave our daughters in marriage to the Mughals. So you can imagine what a troubled relationship it was. And in fact, the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Siyar, when he died, then as soon as he died, this Rajput Rana of Mewar, I think it was, he marched into the Mughal court and brought out his widowed daughter and took her back home. So you can imagine what a burden it must have been to have given his daughter in marriage. Then Mewar, Marwar and Jaipur, 3 royal Rajput houses, they signed an agreement amongst themselves that in future we will never give a daughter in marriage to the Mughals. So, you know, this is, I mean, we have to learn to come to terms with so many. It's not something that is pleasant, but we should acknowledge it. Why should we go on saying, yes, Akbar did a great thing by, you know, marrying. Did Jahangir say that I am the son of a Rajput woman? And the last point, that because we have 5 minutes, so the last point that Alo asked me to make was about the limited participation given to non-Muslims in the entire medieval period, beginning from the Sultanate period till the end of the Mughal Empire. So the facts are there, the statistics are there, I have mentioned them in my book, but just to cut a long story short, in Akbar's time, 70% of his officials, mansabdars, were Muslims, 30% were non-Muslims, about 30% was divided between 15% Rajputs and 15% Indian Muslims. Now Akbar, being a very wise person, chose these 2 allies because nobody will follow the leadership of the Rajputs and replace the Mughals by a Rajput on the Mughal throne. And Indian Muslims, no foreign Muslim is going to accept their leadership. So 70% of Akbar's ruling class consisted of Turanis who had come from Central Asia and Iranis who had come from Persia. So the limited participation of non-foreign nobility in the Mughal setup is something that is really not attended to. And I just want to close this argument by saying that after the death of Aurangzeb, the governors had to be appointed to 3 important Mughal provinces of Bengal, Awadh, that is UP, and Hyderabad. In UP, the person who was appointed governor of that state was someone who had come from Iran in 1706 and was appointed governor of that important place in 1722. So what are we talking about? 1706, somebody comes from Iran. He doesn't know anything about this land. It's just that he's from the ruling fraternity and he's given the important place of Mughal governor of UP, and that's the family that continues to rule UP till 1857. In Hyderabad, the person who is appointed governor of Hyderabad comes at the time of Shah Jahan, and he says that I am a descendant of Abu Bakr, the second caliph. And his descendants continue, and that last Nizam died, I think, a few months ago, isn't it? And the same thing. So the thing is that, it's a battle of ideas. What we are engaged in as a society is a battle of ideas, because we are not going to physically, attack each other. At least people in this room will not do that. The thing is that if you are engaged in a battle of ideas, you have to have the facts which can counter and put the other person in the defensive. Because we are not aware of the facts or ill-informed, the other person goes on getting an advantage, And can I just give one last example in my thing? Now, last example I want to give of how separate they were from us always. And that is the question of language. Akbar was the person who made Persian the language of administration at all levels. Even the village patwari had to learn Persian. Why did he not make any language of the subcontinent? It's because Persian was, you can draw your own conclusion. And so, how do people learn Persian at such a short time? So he imported a large number of people from Iran to come to India and to teach Persian. And he revised the madrasa curriculum so that Khatris and Kayaks, those who are working in the government, can learn Persian quickly. And like we speak English with the Hindi, our accent, and we have so many words that we have incorporated into English. Akbar, fatafat, jaldi, hartal, all these words have become part of English. Akbar was very clear that no non-Persian word should make its way into Persian, and Persian pronunciation should not be compromised. So he got dictionaries prepared, so that if you are not certain about a Persian word, you look up the dictionary and find that Persian word. Persian is not supposed to be indigenized at all. And finally, when the hold of the Mughal Empire became weak and they had to substitute Persian for another language, the natural choice should have been Hindavi, which was the naturally evolving language of the subcontinent. And Hindavi drew words from all over the country. But for the Persian religious and intellectual elite, the problem with Hindavi was that it had a large number of Sanskrit, Tatsam and Tatbhav words. So what did they do? They started a process of throwing out Sanskrit words from Hindavi and substituting them with Arabic and Persian words. I'll just give one example. मुझे ये कार्य प्रातः करना है. ठीक है? मुझे ये काम सुबह करना है. So, I mean, a Muslim language was created out of a non-Muslim language, and the Arabic and Persian words were so filled that it became a very difficult language to understand. So, to conclude, I want to say that India was a very open, liberal, elastic, broad-based society known for its veneration of the land and incorporating everyone. The people who contributed to the civilizational heritage, whether it was temples, whatever it was all strata of society, including women. So when we talk about, a matriarchal system, patriarchal, we have to keep this in mind. And foreigners were also recorded their inscriptions at Sanchi, etc., that we have donated this. So it was welcoming everybody. That was the system that it was. Things changed. We had Northwest ruled by foreign dynasties who were also accepting and embracing. Things changed with the Arabic and Turkish arrival. I have discussed briefly how the whole tenor of this land, it was just totally disrupted, and it was recorded by Persian writers themselves. It is a miracle that we have survived so long, and the only explanation I can give is because this society, this civilization was made by the contributions of ordinary people. It was not a state-sponsored civilization. It was not a top-heavy thing. It was the people who contributed, and that is why it withstood the test of time until Marxist historians came into the field, and they have completely, and they have succeeded. No, and they have succeeded in really brainwashing us. ठीक है? Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think we have time for questions.
No, I don't think. No. I don't know whatever Glory says.
Glory, there's no time for questions, is it?
Okay. I'm so sorry there's no time for questions, but thank you very much for the patient hearing, and thank
Vikram, I will not ask you how you made the short list of the heroes in your book, because you have the right to make the short list, and I will not question it. But I will still ask you as to why you wrote the book.
Thank you, Alo. A very good evening to everyone. I almost have the onerous task of being both the opening batsman and the closing batsman of this wonderful T20 match that Alo and her team has put together. And the second onerous task is to continue after someone like Meenakshi ji. That makes it all the more difficult. For me personally, I forgot to mention in the morning, the long connection with Pondicherry, Puducherry, dates back to my school times, because I studied in the Sri Aurobindo Memorial School in Bangalore, run by members of the ashram, Srimati Hero Vashishta and her sister Aditi Vashishta and so on, who ran the school there. So every in growing up years, visit to the ashram here, to Matru Mandir, to all the places here was very much part of our growing up years. And today, like my good friend Anand mentioned, there were 25 cities all over India, and this happens to be the culmination. So it's all the more special that it's happening in a place which has been so close to my heart. And it gives me an opportunity to also, and after this I'm not going to talk about Bravehearts of Bharat anymore. Hopefully people have read and heard all that I have to say about this. It's a great feeling to actually dedicate this book and the idea behind this book to the great Maharshi, whose grace is right behind all of us here. And so I thought it's best to open with, in fact even the book starts with a prologue, which is that stanza of our national song, the Vande Mataram, which is not invoked usually, and that too has a Pondicherry connection, because this stanza that I have included in the book is a translation by Sri Aurobindo of the original by Bankim Chandra. And this, of course, I'm sure all of you know these verses. Koti koti kantha kala kala ninada karale, कोटि कोटि भुजय धृत खर कर वाले अबला कैनोमा एतो बोले बहुबल धारणीम नमामि तारिणीम रिपुदल वारिणीम मातरम वंदे मातरम. And we actually sang this in the Sri Aurobindo Memorial School too, in the very distinct ashram tune that Mohan Bhai and others here had tuned this and made us sing. And Sri Aurobindo himself translates these verses thus, and I quote: "Who hath said that thou art weak in thy lands, when the sword flesh out in the 70 million hands, and 70 million voices roar thy dreadful name from shore to shore? With many strengths who art mighty and stored, to thee I call, O Mother and Lord. Thou who savest, arise and save. To her I cry, whoever her foe man drove back from plain and sea, and shook herself free." So this Kshatra spirit, so to say, Meenakshi ji mentioned that it was a miracle that we survived. I think one of the factors why we survived was also the fact that we put up a lot of resistance. It was civilizational resistance, but it was also physical resistance and prowess, and military conquest where we won to, which, as she mentioned, the particular species of historians have almost made us feel that we have been a land of losers. Right from our earliest inhabitants, the myth of the Aryan invasion, down to the English East India Company, we have been a nation and a civilization which has only been cowering, in front of invaders, and we really did not put up that fight at all, which is again an ahistorical myth, because if we are around as the only pre-Bronze Age civilization today, alive and kicking, there must have been some resistance that we put to, some wars that we won also, some heroes and heroines and warriors and people, common people who in addition to contributing to the civilization, as she rightly mentioned, also put up a physical defense against whoever invaded us. But those stories and those aspects of our past, in this larger narrative of pacifism, particularly in the 20th century, in the history of our freedom movement itself, that as Nandini ji also mentioned in the morning, that we need to show that we won even something like our political freedom through a very peaceful non-violent method, that there was no kshatriya element there was no violence, there was no bloodshed and armed struggle, that somehow is sought to give us some kind of brownie points in some mythical world, which it doesn't. But then we have been made to believe that, and in the process I think the emasculation of our society, of our as I said, that whole spirit, warrior spirit. We've never been the first land of offense, but then protecting oneself, as Arvindanji also mentioned, the force that resists and ring fences itself against all kinds of predatory forces, those names have somehow been completely missed from our historical consciousness, our memories and so on. So this book, Bravehearts of Bharat, documents 15 such warriors, and for me, importantly, it was also important that the history of India should not just be his story, where her story also needs to find a place. And in fact, I was very keen to include Rani Durgavati in the list, and I was actually scampering for documents and data, and I was so astonished by the amount of research that she had put together and to bring the story of Durgavati. So out of the 15 people, 7 happen to be women and 8 are men. And the other biggest problem which I always think, and the way the narrative of Bharat itself is, that this highly Delhi-centric narrative of everything in this country, whether it is the media, whether it is history, anything. At this rate, I might not even be allowed to enter Delhi with the amount of bad mouthing I do for Delhi all over those 25 cities I go all around. It's a beautiful place and I like it, but then it's just that it gets incommensurate importance by virtue of being the political capital and the capital of importance. Large parts of India can be under floods. Our southern part of India and all its problems seldom feature in the national mainstream media also. Whereas some MCD elections in Delhi, that becomes national news. Some two fellows fighting with each other in that wonderful university that Anand teaches in, that becomes the story of India, and that all the idea of India is under threat and all that. Whereas there are 800 other universities where people are peacefully studying. But then that is the problem. So similarly in history as well, we've all been forced to learn by rote, all the succession lines of Lodhis and Khiljis and Tughlaqs and all these characters whose, I think, our contribution to the civilization, barring few structures here and there, would be next to zilch. They were all largely marauders and barbarians, but we would be forced to learn about them. But then southern India, the Cholas, who ruled for close to 1000 years, other than Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, if you ask the rest of India, and that too maybe only after Ponniyin Selvan, that people know that outside the periphery of South India know that there was a dynasty like this, beyond whatever little is taught to us. If we ask them to name a couple of Chola kings, it will be very difficult for a young person to do that. Similarly, the northeast of India, it's a complete black hole. The Ahoms of the northeast ruled for 600 years. But even among the audience, can we name two Ahom kings who come readily to mind? Anybody? No, so I prove my point there. So for 600 years they ruled, but then we don't know about them. But then an Ibrahim Lodi, Chakradhwaj Singha and Jayadhwaj Singha. So, and they were the, but then we'll know all these Ibrahim Lodi, we'll know Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, all these names, Muhammad bin Qasim, Meenakshi spoke about. We all would have heard about the invasion of Sindh and when it happened. But the resistance that was given to them by Raja Dahar of Sindh and his predecessor Chacha, who established the dynasty, all of it beautifully documented in the Chachnama. Those things will never be told to us, that right from 636 CE or so on, there were invasions on Sindh. It took them 70 years to occupy, finally in 710 when Qasim came. So many years, all the repulsions that were done of the invasions, that story is not told to us. The long litany, a laundry list of wars that we as India and Indians only lost, battles of Panipat, Battle of Buxar, Plassey, Anglo-Mysore, Anglo-Maratha, Anglo-Sikh, all of them are just wars that we lost. So while, I'm not making a case that we need to be jingoistic and beat our chests and say all the kind of things that a lot of loony elements also do, I think this sense of genuine pride that we kept ourselves alive through physical prowess also, in addition to the civilizational strength that this nation has, I think that was very important to encapsulate. And you can do that only through, in my case, I love to see biography as a window to the history of the times. How through the lives of these 15 people, it's not just their stories, but through their lives, it opens a window to that era in which they lived, what were the other contemporary forces at that time, how did they interact, and in that milieu, how did these people make their mark. So the 15 other people, I'll just list their names at least so that rings a bell for most of us. Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir. The book starts with his story, someone who was called the second Alexander and the second Samudragupta, who ensured, along with several other alliances that were done, Bappa Raval, Nagabhatta, Pulakeshin, and so on, to keep the Arabs at bay. It took the Arabs and the Turks about 500 years to establish the first Islamic Sultanate in India with the Delhi Sultanate after the Arab invasion of Sindh. So for 500 years there was a pushback, there was constant resistance which didn't allow these characters, even Muhammad Ghazni and others didn't get a free pass. We'll talk more about that later. Yeah. So Lalitaditya's story talks about this, and in the process brings Dahar and Chacha and also Yashovarman of Kannauj, who was his foe, but then they joined hands against the Arabs. Then we come down south to this part of the country where Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, who took the sphere of influence, one is of Gangaikonda Cholapuram, to go all the way up to the banks of the Ganga and then bring the water from there, and also outside the subcontinent as we know it today, to Sri Lanka, to Maldives, to Srivijaya in the Malay Peninsula. The third person whom I cover is Naiki Devi of Gujarat, a Chalukyan ruler who in 1178 in the Battle of Kasarhada actually defeats Muhammad Ghori, and Muhammad Ghori is so humiliated that he is defeated by a woman that he never turns towards Gujarat again. Several decades later, it's up to Aibak, his slave, to actually defeat and capture Gujarat, and then by then the Chalukya dynasty has broken off into the Vaghela branch. Then you have Rudramma Devi of Warangal, who again we can talk more about the women in detail, who was fighting constantly, even died in battle at the age of 80, against incursions both within and without of her kingdom. Rana Kumbha of Mewar, who was an unvanquished ruler. He never lost any war all his life, and he built what is probably the second longest wall in the world after the Great Wall of China, the Kumbhalgarh Fort, which I don't know, we would probably not even visit, not even commemorate this man. Then again Rani Abbakka Chautha of Ullal in Karnataka, who defeated the Portuguese, Portuguese, and we'll talk again more about that when you get into the stories of some of these women. Chand Bibi of Ahmednagar, again this, the risk of making it a binary of Hindu versus Muslim and so on is very rife. So Chand Bibi, the Deccan Sultanates and the kind of resistance they put against the Mughals, and it needed Akbar to come all the way himself after his son could not vanquish Chand Bibi, and finally Chand Bibi had to be killed by deceit by a eunuch in her court by Akbar's army spreading some rumors against her. Then we have Kanhoji Angre, the Maratha Sarkhel, or the naval commander, who constantly kept the Konkan fort, the western coast, protected against the Portuguese, the English East India Company, and also the Siddhis who were ruling there. Then I forget, we have Banda Singh Bahadur, who established India's, the first Sikh state. Again a very, very fascinating story of this man who was a Hindu, who became a mystic and then comes under the spell of Guru Gobind Singh and becomes his Banda. or disciple, and then takes revenge for all the atrocities that Aurangzeb commits, particularly against the Sahibzadas. We recently celebrated or commemorated the Veer Balak Divas, so for the two Sahibzadas, Fateh Singh and Zorawar Singh.
Yes.
Their killers were avenged by Banda Singh Bahadur, Wazir Khan of Sirhind, and Marthanda Varma in Kerala, someone who defeats the Dutch East India Company in the Battle of Kolachal. By then, the Dutch East India Company has spread into one of the most widespread global powers, being the first ever company to be listed on a global stock exchange. Their sphere of influence extending from South Africa, moving all the way through Asia, southern India, Bengal, and also to Japan and Maldives. So today, he defeated them in the Battle of Kolachal in 1741, and if he had not done that, maybe we would all be talking today in Dutch. Because their idea of colonizing India was very much, paramount on their minds. But this defeat ensured that the Dutch collapsed. Even as a global, their stocks fell in the global market. Their pepper trade and spice trade suffered immensely from the Malabar coast. And after that, you don't hear much about the Dutch in Indian history. In any other country, you would have Marthanda Varma statues, I think, in every street corner, and people would have celebrated him. But other than maybe Kerala and maybe border districts here and there, Kanyakumari and so on, people don't know much about this man. Similarly, the Northeast, Lachit Barphukan of Assam, Army General of the Ahom rulers, Chakradhwaj and Jayadhwaj Singha, who defeats the largest imperial army of Aurangzeb sent under Raja Ram Singh of Jaipur in what is known as the Battle of Saraighat. So we already have three battles that I've spoken about: Battle of Kasarhada, Battle of Kolachal, Battle of Saraighat, where there have also been documented victories among several others that are there in the book. A few others are there, like Rajashri Bhagyachandra Jai Singh of Manipur, again very little.
Ahilyabai
Holkar of Indore, and Velu Nachiyar from Shivganga, and the book ends with Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh, who was the face of resistance in Lucknow, and Lucknow was the last bastion when most of the other regions had fallen to the British might in the Great Revolt. It was Lucknow which was the last bastion which survived. And there also it was important to bring people like this, because during her time there was a Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah who was looking at the entire thing as a jihad, as a specifically an Islamic conquest against all infidels, whether it was the Hindu or the British. Whereas this lady was someone who was trying to put all of them into the fold, including most of her army were actually Hindus. The women corps that she created was largely led by Dalits, including this lady called Uda Devi Pasi, who was a part of the army, who was killed by the British. So these 15 stories, very, very disparate, but I think linked with that common thread of a civilizational resistance, a civilizational upsurge, probably one of the many reasons why we are still around today as a civilization. So very long answer to your short question.
That's how it's going to be for the rest of the hour. So if you followed the sequence, you would have understood that while it makes sense to, because they are all vertical biographies, you can read them, but reading them from first to last makes chronological sense. So I would recommend everybody to go starting from Lalita Aditya and ending with the last one, because it really gives you such a vast, wonderful canvas of the time from from the very first Mughal Arab invasion with Lalita Aditya. He's way more than that up to this point. Now I will ask you the question about women. Now, if you take the same era in Europe, I just wanted to make this comparison because I was teaching the Middle Ages in class, and from say the 800s up to 1857, we know that in the Middle Ages they had nothing. The Renaissance, they were you can't even name a painter, maybe one or two. The Enlightenment, they were seriously kept out of the process. In the Industrial Revolution, I can't think of too many women. But that's not the case with India at all, and today we are being sermoned about feminism. So can you touch upon the lives of the women? They were widows, they were ladies who had to dress like men, They were ladies who defied the times, incredible courage. So can you just the gaze of women, or the way the women lived, especially women of power, touch upon these biographies and discuss this point?
Yeah. Oh my God, that will be an entire session in itself. But very briefly, one point that I'd like to add, Alo, to what you said, the chronology. So it's for me, this book is the history of India seen through the eyes of these people, where all these dynasties make an appearance. I do not, subscribe to this notion that somebody should be excised from our history. In the state I come from, Karnataka, there is this constant political tussle that, Tipu Sultan should not find a place in the history of the textbooks and all, which I think is a foolish argument by right-wing groups, because you cannot wish away your history. If you don't like Tipu Sultan, that's your problem. He was very much a part of the history of Karnataka and Mysore, and it's up to the pedagogy to include all of the good, bad, the ugly elements of everybody who ruled us. Now, how much do you make them the center of attention? That is where I think the difference comes. So here Lodhis, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Mughals, all of them come and go, but the spotlight is not on them. The spotlight is on the people we need to celebrate. The history of India need not be the history of the invaders and invasions, but we can turn the light on to someone else, and then you get a completely different narrative. Those people become peripheral characters rather than what we have in our books as regional histories. Now, who are we to say the Cholas are regional and the Lodhis and Khiljis are national? What is national? What is mainstream? What is regional? So I think all these questions beg for an answer, which everyone is as important. The Ahoms are as national as the Mughals, and so on.
Absolutely.
Now, about the women, each of these 7 people, which was a very tough task to choose, and one among them is not a traditional warrior, Ahilyabai Holkar, who didn't, of course, briefly she tried to resist the Peshwa, Raghoba, Peshwa's uncle, from taking over because he realized that a woman had taken on the throne of Indore after the death of the father-in-law, Malhar Rao. But beyond that, she didn't actually wage a war. But I think her inclusion was very important as a civilizational warrior, and we'll probably touch upon that. But all the others were fighter women, whether it was Rudrama Devi, who, as I mentioned, and we keep having this discussion along with feminism also about patriarchy. I think in India it is very, very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all definition for any concept. You have elements of both, and I'll just elaborate that. Rudrama Devi from the Kakatiya, kingdom, her father Ganpati Deva, he doesn't have a male heir, and he does what is known as the Putrika Yajna, which is to anoint the daughter as the successor, legitimate successor. And he does something very interesting, that he hides the gender of the daughter. She's sent away as a small child into hiding with some of these, the nobles and warriors, to train her right from childhood in military warfare. And much later, when she comes of age, when her gender can no longer be hidden, that's when she's announced to the rest of the kingdom. And father and daughter together sit on the throne and rule for a couple of years, and then the father dies and she takes over as the successor. And since then, as I said, from the day she becomes the ruler till the day of her death at the age of 80, there is constant fight. So there is a father who's also giving this opportunity to the daughter in the patriarchal setup that we talk of. And that continues several centuries later, where even Velu Nachiyar, her father in the Ramanathapuram and Shivganga, the two principalities that she's born in and then married to, there also her father trains her in all the elements of warfare, the acrobatics and everything that she is taught. And that is why she becomes such an important bulwark against the East India Company, the first woman to fight a war against the East India Company and also to regain the kingdom of Shivganga from them and the Arcot Nawab. Ahilyabai Holkar, again, very, very fascinating story, where she's her father-in-law Malhar Rao Holkar, he's transiting from one place to the other, he's spending a night somewhere, and then there he in the host's house he finds this young girl who's very, very intelligent and well mannered, and he is immediately, taken in by her, and he asks for her hand in marriage for his son, Khande Rao, and she's married and he's brought back to Indore as the daughter-in-law. And Malhar Rao Holkar ensures the education of his daughter-in-law. Again, you have a father-in-law who's ensuring the education of the daughter-in-law. She's trained in finance, in administration, and the son is a little delinquent. He has multiple, dalliances, affairs, and so the daughter-in-law becomes the main support for the father-in-law, and he's constantly communicating with her, even when he's at the third battle of Panipat, so giving her valuable information about geopolitics, about statecraft and all of that. And when Khande Rao dies and all the other wives, they commit sati, this lady is asked not to. You have been the source of support. If you also commit sati, then what will happen to me? And she agrees, and she becomes the successor to Malhar Rao after he dies. So we have examples like this where where fathers have ensured that the daughters are either successors or trained in warfare and physical activity, or even given intellectual, training like Malhar Rao is done. But at the same time, you also have a lot of examples, including in this book and otherwise, where, I found this very, very alarming, that the insinuations and the, chronicles that are done for a woman ruler. It was so difficult for a woman to be in power. That right from Rani Didda of Kashmir, or Abbakka also, or even someone as pious as Ahilya Bai, the common bazaar gossip would be, especially if the queen, the children were dead, the mortality rate was what it was, and so it was natural that many of the children died. The insinuation would be this lady is into black magic and witchcraft, she's a witch, and she's so insecure of her son, and so she's actually got him killed. So including when Ahilya Bai's son goes a little, deranged and also later dies, there's a lot of talk that she has done something on him. So this kind of, and Abbakka too, which becomes common parlance. So you have these kind of narratives too, where it was so difficult for people to accept that a woman can be in positions of power. And someone like Naiki Devi, whom I mentioned, who had such an important role in the history of India, I would say, because if Ghori had occupied Gujarat then, and the whole of Rajputana, southern Gujarat would have fallen to him at that time. She was the regent queen of an infant boy, Mul Raja II. All her chroniclers, contemporary chroniclers, forget who are now, Ari Simha, Merutunga, Som Shekhara, all these people who wrote in Sanskrit and Prakrit and so on, Jain scholars and so on, they don't even give her any credit. They say this infant king was given a toy by the mother, and which was the sword, and just brandishing his sword, he defeated the Hammira and threw him out of the, this one in the battle of Kasarhada. So the mother's role there is only to give this toy of a sword, and this 5-year-old or 6-year-old was so brave that he actually defeated Muhammad Ghori. And Merutunga, who actually mentions her as the Goa Kadamba princess, the daughter of Paramardin, he goes on to say that the Hammira was so weak that even a lady could defeat him, where the importance of the woman is not there, only because the opponent was so weak, that is why she managed to defeat him. If he was strong, then she would not have managed to defeat. So we have certainly both examples. So that's why I said, when we come with all these modern constructs of patriarchy and feminism and all these things, it's very difficult, because for every rule there is an exception. Both ways you can argue, like in law and economics, that you can have counterexamples for both sides to kind of make your case for either things. But by and large, the importance that women and their contributions to the civilization, to the kingdom, to society, that is so underemphasized. Meenakshi ji mentioned about those contributions to by widows and kings, queens. In Gujarat, the Rani Ki Vav that we find, that also is by Rani Udaymati, who was the widow of Bhim Deva, the Taj Mahal we commemorate as something that, the king's love for the wife and so on. There are examples where the queen built these magnificent, architectural splendors in memory of her husband who had died. The Rani Ki Vav is one such. Similarly, in Ahmedabad, Karnavati, you have the Adalaj Ki Vav. That also is by this Rudabai. It's called actually Rudabai Ki Vav, which was also built by a lady in memory of the Waghela ruler, her husband, who had died. So, all these numerous examples, they just don't strike a bell. And what an architectural splendor the Rani Ki Vav is. It's after all just a simple well to store water, but then a step well with such intricate carvings and so on, and something as mundane as storing water is also made aesthetically so beautiful, which I think in a way only a woman could conceive of and conceptualize. That is something that unfortunately she is seldom given credit for.
The other underlying theme that some of your heroes have is the relationship with Dharma. At some point, maybe sometimes right from the beginning, or at some point after their conquest, a certain amount of stable rule, they literally consecrate their life to Dharma. They become literally servitors of temples. So Martanda Varma comes to mind. Ahilyabai Holkar's, I think, entire life is that. You have the king of Manipur who you say, you give the entire strain of Vaishnavism being introduced there. So you again touch upon the heroes and tell us about this very fundamental aspect of the relationship the kings had with Dharma, with temples, with spirituality, with maintenance and subsistence to these structures, to these establishments. Yeah.
Along with that, Alo, I think right from Lalitaditya's example.
Oh yes, of course. My God, how could I forget the Martanda Varma? Yeah.
Yeah, you have, Meenakshi ji spoke about the Chakravarti Raja who went on a Digvijaya campaign. Digvijaya was, beyond just political conquest and conquering of lands. It was also an intellectual conquest. So, everywhere that he went and conquered whoever, Kannauj or other places, he would bring all the scholars from those places to his kingdom. So, the importance of your empire was of course measured by the amount of palaces, the opulence, the temples and all this you built, but also the intellectual quotient. Today we lack that, where we are only looking at materialistic things to measure success. Are we the 5th largest economy? How fast we are growing? But that is very important. But along with that, what is the intellectual quotient? What is the scholarship? And there, the demonization of those who produce knowledge over the centuries, that has ensured that this is almost like a bad word. So, in this, the Digvijaya was done and you became a Chakravarti along with great empires you built. Your empire, your court had to be a seat of learning, and the index of how great you were was a composite, index of all of this. So, Vakpati, Bhavabhuti, Atrigupta, all these people were brought from various conquests, Aryabhatta and so on, to the Kashmir court. And Atrigupta, for instance, was the grandfather of Abhinav Gupta, who established the entire Kashmir school of Shaivism. Kashmir became a center of Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism and Ayurveda, astronomy, all of these things. So that how intellectually fertile your kingdom was, that was also very, very important. And then the dharmic element as well, where Manipur, you mentioned Jai Singh. Now his ancestor was this man called Pamheba, who was the one who introduced Hinduism in the indigenous communities of Manipur, and it was Jai Singh who united all the Metis indigenous tribes and also brought Vaishnavism. So today we have the Manipuri Ras Leela, you have the Nata Sankirtana that is goes on there as a very important cultural element of Manipur, and in Imphal you have the Sri Govindji temple. Now it's said that constant Burmese incursions into Manipur, he was battling those. He had alliances, matrimonial and others with the Ahoms. So he had taken shelter in the Ahom court, and there he has a dream where Krishna is supposed to have come in his dream and said, there is a certain jackfruit tree somewhere, you go cut it and make that into the idols of Krishna, Subhadra, Balbhadra, and then consecrate that in your court, and you will get back your kingdom. And so after coming back from exile, this man goes and cuts that jackfruit, and the consecration is to happen. quite magically, while the Radha, or the female counterpart of this one, is to be sculpted, the jackfruit tree falls short of the wood. And then he does something very strange, which is his 8-year-old daughter, Bimbavati or Lakshmi Priya. He dedicates her as Radha to the Govindji, and she becomes, that name is very complicated, some Manipuri name. That's the new name that she takes on. And through that, so this whole Ras Leela that you see of dance with those round costumes, and the songs that were composed then, that gave Manipur its cultural element, and the name Manipur itself, a very Sanskritic name, was also given by this man. So that was as important. And in his kingdom, when by chance a Brahmin priest was punished wrongly and executed, this man is so sad that under his watch an injustice has been committed, and so he renounces his kingdom and goes away on penance all the way to Vrindavan, and on the way he dies. Similarly, Marthanda Varma, he is somebody from the small principality called Venad. He creates his entire Travancore kingdom, all the small Quilon and Elayada Swarupam, all these small principalities he unites and makes Travancore, suppresses all the terrible rebellions that are happening in Travancore by the Pillayars and all these people who are there in the court. And after all this campaign, he dedicates the entire kingdom to Sri Padmanabha Swami and calls himself Padmanabha Dasa. And the king is a trustee. I am just a trustee. I am carrying out the entire rule in your name. So that spiritual element, even when we not mentioned here, but Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and so on, the spiritual element of that. And that is where I think Bankim Chandra's verse, and also what Aravindanji rightly mentioned, this whole element of the divine feminine, that Devi, Bhavani, Bharti, as Sri Aurobindo mentions, Chandi in Punjab, Durga in Bengal, Bhavani in Maharashtra, their role in this warrior spirit, and which in turn I think fed into our freedom movement, which fed into the way the violent struggle of the revolutionaries, of which I think Sanjeev must have spoken in depth in the afternoon. That was a very important element. Now, post-independence, particularly since the Hindu element of our existence had to be subsumed, even in the freedom movement, all these elements, today a Bankim Chandra would be probably called communal. All these people who took, Shivaji Maharaj who took an oath on Bhavani's sword that was given to him and so on, they would be communal. So all these elements had to be subsumed, and the freedom movement itself sanitized to such an extent that these aspects don't come out. But then the long tradition of that goes back to all these different Bravehearts of Bharat, who for whom Dharma, spirituality and that Kshatriya spirit that came with it was a very, very essential component. We were not an absolute non-violent or pacifist civilization or nation.
So my last question in two parts, because I think it's only fair that we finally give the audience a chance to ask questions. It pertains to also the way you write your book. Each story begins with a beautiful legend. Sometimes it is oral tradition, sometimes it is song, sometimes it is almost fantastic. And also, the reason why I'm asking you that is you are a trained historian. So what is the value you see in this sort of inclusion of legend into writing a biography? Because some of it is steeped or anchored in fact. And the reason I'm asking you this is that, when we are going on talking about debunking history and, setting the narratives right, there is a certain lived reality that is lived via these songs, via these legends, via these mythological stories that persist even among the people today. Yeah. Whereas in academia, we have this entire debate of writing, setting a narrative, debunking a narrative, and I know that every time there is a controversy about Savarkar, I feel bad for you, that you have to keep coming back on TV and again and again and again talking about petition, it's become, so you understand. So how long are we going to be in a setting of debunking? and at the academic level, whereas when we read the stories, there's so much that is still alive within the people. So can you just wind up with that?
Yeah. Before that, I'll just bring one element which I forgot, which was, one is of course the folk legends and so on.
Yes.
To all those people who say, there was no consciousness of Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism or whatever, right through this unending chain that we see of common resistance that I'm talking of. And when Muhammad Ghazni, goes to Somnath, by then this Bhimdeva, who is the ruler, he has run away. And he has a free run through Patan and goes to Somnath. And there he is so, astonished to see about 50,000 common Hindus who are protecting the temple. And it takes him 3 days to kill all of them, and then he enters the temple. And there too, of course, this unfortunate distortion that is done to mention Somnath, that this was not for theological reasons. Of course, you have the wicked Brahmin who was amassing wealth, and it was a den of all kinds of vices. Recently there was some nonsense that he found a lot of vices there, and so he came he came to
I
cleanse.
think the same about
Aurangzeb
yeah.
in Kashi. He found, to protect women. That's the silliest thing, where Ghazni had entire this thing of slave trade and sex trade with all the women from Hindustan being taken there. And these people were coming all the way and cleansing our temples, where they found all kinds of vices apparently. So, and also eminent historians who keep telling us this, that it was not at all for this one. Different chroniclers have different versions. Obviously, today if there's an accident that's happened on the road and you ask 10 eyewitnesses, 10 people will tell 10 different things. Finally, did the fellow die or not? That is the ultimate question, which maybe there's a concurrence. But all those chroniclers are unanimous in their account that he destroyed the Somnath Shivling. How he did he pierce it in the middle or from the top? That doesn't become a thing to say that he didn't do it. So there too, when he goes there and he, after killing these 50,000 people, he goes and asks these, the priests come running and say, you are a lutera, so whatever amount of money you want, you take and just leave from this place. He supposed to have laughed, and this is what some of his Al-Baruni, then Farishta, Minhaj-e-Siraj, all these people accounted in detail, that he laughs and says, if I do that, my name will be etched in history as a trader of idols. I don't want my name to be known like that. I want to be known as But Shikan or a breaker of idols. So all Sikandar But Shikan of the Shahmiri dynasty of Kashmir, they took pride in suffixing their name with the title But Shikan. That was a common title to all those people who broke as many Buts or idols. So in such a case where he says that, and this is accounted first person accounts of their own chroniclers, you have today's fellows saying that this was not for theological purpose, it was only for wealth and all of that. And even after, so let the rulers do what they do. Now after he is going back to Ghazni, the amount of consciousness, the hurt that is there in the minds and souls and psyche of common Hindus, that their important Jyotirlinga was desecrated. When the army is wanting to go back, of course Bhimdeva comes and makes a re-entry and tries to attack him from the back, and while he is literally on a retreat, then a few people come posing as guides and say the army needs water and food and so on. So they say, we'll show you where water is available, and they take him all around the desert and arid regions, and at some point they become suspicious as to where they are leading us, and they catch the guide and ask him to reveal the truth. And finally he says, yes, there is no water body here, and I am actually misleading you and misguiding you, and I wanted to take revenge and ensure your entire army and you die of starvation and thirst. And of course he is Sartan se juda after that. But then this common angst,
absolutely,
the consciousness, and that remained so many centuries later. So why did Ahilyabai 800, 900 years later, it struck her that these were the important centers she had to renovate. It was something important in the psyche and consciousness of people. It was passed on generation to generation. She consecrated all the 12 Jyotirlingas, renovated them, the 4 dhams, the 7 puris as mentioned in the Garud Puran. She literally marked the civilizational contours of Bharat, as probably Adi Shankara had done several centuries ago. And few more years later, when that story of course has multiple contestations, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh, it is said, when he made this offensive against Durrani, Zaman Shah in Afghanistan, it is said that he, after defeating him, said, you give us back the dwars, the silver gates, which was of Somnath, which was put into Ghazni's mausoleum, the Mazar in Ghazni. And as a, after being defeated, they had to give those things back. But by then there was no temple there, it was all in ruins and so on. So the people in Gujarat said, we can't house it. And it was actually made as the Darshan Dwars of the Golden Temple. The original, this ones that came, sandalwood gates with silver laden and so on. There are contestations to that. Some say this is, and the Sikh revivalism that we see today, they don't want to associate with the Hindu element of their own Maharajas. That becomes a problem. But still, Ranjit Singh also donated so much of gold to the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir. So why was that happening? All through that consciousness of this wounded civilization, that things have been broken. And I think those who haven't read should read Meenakshi ji's book on the flight of Hindu deities, which is, I think, like, it's a heart-moving account of how resilience was, along with battles, common people transporting idols, moving from one place to the other, hiding it in wells, in lakes, burying it underground, all these things happening all the time. That is how this, the survival has happened due to this indomitable strength of resilience. And that is also lived history, that is also lived experience. But to your question on folklore, one example, because there's not much time, we've all seen Kantara and this whole idea of Bhuta tradition, Bhuta Aradhane. So in coastal Karnataka, most of us in mainstream history textbooks, we may not know about Rani Abbakka. But in coastal Karnataka, in Ullal, in Mangalore, that region, the Bhuta Aradhane that is done invokes not only gods and demigods and spirits, but also ancestors, kings and queens and so on. And Abbakka is invoked in plural form, because there were 4 Abbakas actually, not 1 but 4, and all of them in their own ways gave resistance to the Portuguese. So they are invoked as Abbakka Deviyaru or Mahadevi. That is the common thing. And this Abbakka spirit comes, and I was fortunate to see one such performance, where the practitioner talks about how we destroyed the Portuguese fleet, and very graphic details and so on. A lot of it is fantastic stories, which is interesting, and like what we discussed, Anand and I, in the morning, of how that storytelling, the fictional element, makes it so interesting and enlivening for all of us. History is not some dead, frozen museum object, but something that lives amidst us. So all these were there, but then for a modern historian, researcher, how do you then triangulate that famous word of triangulation of facts? How do you see, is this all true? That practitioner who's probably illiterate, is he actually telling, is there some kernel of truth, historical truth in that performance? So while I was doing this, there's this Italian, traveler, Pietro della Velle, who comes to India and goes all into different places. He has heard about this entire story of Abbakka in the court of the Persian emperor, and then among other things, he also wants to come and see who is this lady. And the story that was doing the rounds was precisely this, that there was this lady who actually defeated the Portuguese fleet. And how did they do that? When the fleet was parked on the shores of Mangalore, in the night, all the Mapillas, the Mogaviras, all these soldiers of hers, in coconut shells, the ammunition was filled, and these were hurled, hundreds of coconut, very indigenous ammunition, made and hurled at the Portuguese fleet, and the entire thing caught fire, and all the admirals and captains, everybody was killed. And that news travelled all the way to Persia, and this man heard it, and he, among other places, also comes to Ullal. He calls it some other name in his memoirs, And in his memoirs, there is an account of all of this. There is also an account, he meets her, of course, a colonial glance that he has. He says, this lady, she destroys all my idea of what a queen should be. She's so dark and corpulent and very, very unprincely. There's no upper garment also on her body. She's walking like that only in the bazaars with no fanfare and so on. But then there is, as I said, that kernel of truth of this actually happening. Maybe the exaggeration of the folk performance may not match 100% with what the historical truth is, but there is some element of truth in these stories. In fact, in Kannada, there is a very famous saying that the Vedas can go wrong, but the proverbs, which are lived histories, they can never go wrong. So, that is the amount of importance given to oral traditions. So, I think oral traditions, folklore, they become very, very important crutches for modern historians to reconstruct the story when mainstream chronicling, mainstream documentation ignores and excises many of these great men and women.
Questions?
You have 6 minutes.
There's a lady. Two.
You want this
I'm
one?
glad there are two women in the.
Vikramji, thank you.
Later.
Yes, it's on, I think.
Ethan?
Thank you for a very enlightening session. Just wanted to tell you, it's very interesting you're talking about Abakka Chauta and the traditions in Ullal, because for Durgavati also, the gods have turned her into a goddess.
Yes.
So it's the same, I think there is some kind of, so do you know other examples like this, where the queen becomes mythologized into a celestial being?
I think one that comes, even Lakshmi Bai, the manner in which she is among the Bundelas and so on in Bundelkhand, I think she is to quite an extent, may not be as a goddess, but I think in folklore she is given a lot more importance than what she actually was. Ahilya Bai for sure, Punya Shlok and the entire Indore airport named after her, there are and the maternal concern that she had for the kingdom, which I think was very important when we talk of leadership models too. Here was a maternal instinct of this lady that what good governance and leadership needs to be, where not only the human being, even for the human beings in the summer months, there would be people who would be stationed on footpaths to give water to the poor and needy. In the winters, there would be people who would give bedding and blankets and warm wear. Not only human beings, but also dogs and cats and stray animals. For them, there would be pots of water and food kept in different parts of Indore. The Narmada Ghats, where she would go for a ritual bath every morning, there was specific amount of food kept aside for the fish which were there in the river. So the a ruler, what a good ruler needs to be, not just look after the human beings in the kingdom, but you are a mother for the entire, all the living beings. I think that element is what makes them deified to the extent that they are, and rightly so. Yes.
Anand wants to ask a question.
I think the lady after that. I'm very scared of that man. So. 10 seconds, yeah. She will take only 10. Your strategy back at you.
What, according to you, led to this much of whitewashing of our history? Second question. You talked about Koili in your book.
Yes.
And there are some sources which say Koili is a fictional character. Did you really get some material evidence that she was a true character?
Yes, there is. In the British accounts itself, there is a very small mention of this lady. So, Koili is this character, I'm sure in Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry, there's no need to say much about that, but the first suicide bomber, so to say, where she douses herself with kerosene. She was a part of the women corps of Velu Nachiyar, and to regain Shiv Ganga on the day of Vijayadashmi, when all these women are going there and ostensibly as devotees to worship at the Rajarajeshwari Koil there, she goes inside and douses herself with kerosene, enters the ammunition center and sets herself on fire, and the whole the Shastra Bhandar is destroyed, and that is how these women then remove their swords with vetrival, slogans, and then enter this one. So there is an account of that in the British documents, and very fleetingly even in the Arcot chronicles about, they don't mention the name, maybe that way she may be fictional, but there was some woman who did things like this is certainly mentioned.
First question.
Not
What was the first question?
the same debunking, how long, why?
Why whitewashing happened, I think the way Meenakshi ji ended her this thing, and then we had the Marxist historians, and the rest is history.
Yeah, hi Vikram.
Yes.
This is a small question. One thing about whitewashing which I won't ask because plenty has been said about it, and you're absolutely right, the audience is as well. But I put to you, it is amazing the pride with which you have narrated what our ancestors did and achieved. And I must say that pride got transmitted to the readers as well. I took pride in reading what our ancestors did, but here is the thing. This will last only till such time that we are Hindus. We aren't converted, So I put to you, brainwashing is one thing, whitewashing of history is another. But this history, writing it and reading it, will only remain till such time we are Hindus. Don't you think so?
Completely agree. I completely agree. And your question therefore is, what is the solution to that? I wish.
Are we Hindus?
My question is, why do only Hindus amongst Indians take pride in our ancestors?
Which is the saddest part, I think, and I know it's we were having this discussion last evening also. It sometimes seems like a lost cause, but I keep hammering that much at the peril of a lot of people on this side of the ideological divide too. Can we, in some manner, de-hyphenate communities of today, particularly say the Muslim community, and elements of those who take pride in what the atrocities and associate with the invader. And there are politicians who go to the mazar of Aurangzeb and pay their obeisances, whereas the man was a monster who doesn't even deserve a mazar. So can we in some way keep hammering that version, that can we de-hyphenate all of you? They are not your icons, they are not your heroes. Your ancestors suffered at the hands of these people as much as the ancestors of the Hindus. Yours converted, none of them have come in from Iran or anywhere else, Central Asia. They've all been people of this land itself. Their ancestors, for various reasons, either they could not resist or it was such coercion that they had to convert. So I think the Indonesian model in some ways, where you can be a Muslim nation, but the Hindu culture there, where Ram Leela is performed even by a Muslim majority country, where there are icons of Hinduism there, where they all say we trace our ancestry to that. We may by faith be something else. I don't know, I'm probably a champion for lost causes, but there's no harm trying that, rather than push even the very thin and probably the minuscule minority among the minorities who are probably what we can call moderate, and also let them consolidate against a larger bloc. I don't know, it may be a lost cause, but certainly worth I think trying to ensure. Can we build that narrative instead, that don't take pride in these characters, Ghazni, Ghori. While we say today's Muslims are not responsible for all the atrocities, don't make today's people associate or idolize, and we have ruled over you for 800 years, give us the army for half an hour and we'll show you what it is, and these kind of statements. I think that if we can somehow get rid of that, I know it's, as I said, it's a lost cause, but certainly worth trying.
Okay, so we've run out of time,
But Meenakshi ji always has the last word.
Just one thing I want to add. You said if they can accept their Hindu ancestry, that seems absolutely impossible. I'm just giving you an example that in 1911, the census was done in Bengal. All right? out of 21 million Muslims, 19 million said we have come from outside. Whereas the number was actually just the opposite. They were all locals who had converted, but they said, no, we have come from outside. So that gives you an idea of the challenges.
No, of course, it's as I said, I predated it saying that it's a lost cause. But what is the solution then? I mean, Dr. Ambedkar, no, then are we living on a tinder box, waiting to explode at any time? Then that's not even a solution. Dr. Ambedkar had probably rightly postulated that in 1947 there must be a complete transfer of populations, which has not happened. It is a very integral and an important part of society. So at the maximum, can you, if whitewash and brainwash has happened to the Hindu psyche and Hindu mind for so many decades after independence, this is normal wash, not even whitewash. Can we try with some elements of those side to ensure that there is some crossover? As I said, it's an experiment worth trying, but that is the next, only last option that one has. Because history also thereby has when we constantly demonize and do this, in 1937, I think history has that important lesson also, that the Muslim League was at the brink of disaster, breaking up. There were so many protests. The manner in which they were pushed to the wall by Nehru after the 1937 elections, when governments were to be formed in the United Provinces and Muslim League wanted to ally with the Congress, but these things were spurred saying you join the Congress. So when that community is pushed to the wall, they regroup and come back with a added power and vengeance, and that detriment that it did to the subcontinent we all know. So do we want to do something similar where we can alienate to the extent that there is being pushed to the wall, there is another consolidation, another division, another bloodbath? I don't know. As I said, that's why. So that's why, I mean, many people have, had problems saying, how can Chand Bibi be a part of this? How can Hazrat Mahal? So why don't we say that these are your icons? Why don't we say a Rahim, a Ras Khan, a Shishunal Sharifa, or APJ Abdul Kalam, or Arif Muhammad Khan? These people can be your icons rather than Aurangzeb and Tippu and all these people. To make icons of, you need to whitewash them. So as I said, this is the success of this experiment. I can certainly not guarantee. Maybe it will be a failure, but it is certainly worth trying rather than the other very dangerous alternative, which will, God forbid, see another repetition of 1947.
So,
sorry, it was a very somber note to end on.
No. With that, we conclude this session. But Vikram, probably it's not just they accepting their right heroes. The day a Muslim historian of your caliber will include Hindu heroes in their list of heroes, maybe that day it will be. It's not just them accepting the right, just like you did with Chand Bibi and Hazrat Mahal.
Yeah,
that will be the day.
True.
So with that, we conclude this session and this day.
Thank you.
I just need to blue ink now with this new logo ink, who have been supporters, as well as Swarajya, mine, and Khulke. So without their support and patronage, this would not have been possible. Always deep gratitude for our speakers to accept, I don't bully, to accept our invitation and grace our platform and be so generous with your information and time. And of course, Team PLF, of which I'm a part. I'm saying this on behalf of my colleagues, Ajit and Partho. Without this team, I don't think there would be any fun in even doing this, what we do. We do it because we love it. And we just we really like to come together, brainstorm, come up with ideas, work for it. And then, last night till 3 in the morning, you had Ajit and my sister setting the venue up. But that's what we are about, and that's what we love to do. And so we are only too happy that the viewers, the listeners of Pondicherry come, and you even travel from various places. Without you, our effort would have been in vain. So thank you all for coming. And yes, Bharat Shakti is all what we are, so I end with a Vande Mataram. Thank you.
The bookstalls will be open for another 20 minutes if you want to buy any of the books and get them autographed by the authors.